I'm Jenny Gage, and this is Life Take Two. Hello, friends. Welcome to my channel where I share my escape from the twin prisons of Mormonism and tradwife life and help you determine if maybe you're in a patriarchal system of your own. Today, I'm going to be spilling a little bit of Mormon tea. But first, I have just a little teensy favor. Will you head over to my new podcast, Under Her Eye, and give that a sub over there? Tomorrow, Beth and I will be talking about her recent conversation with Lori Vallow Daybell and some creepy insight that she's gleaned from that, and you're not going to want to miss it. She hasn't told me about the conversation or some of the things that have been happening this week because she wants my blind reaction to everything, so I'll be hearing this for the first time with you. Thank you so much. All right, now for a little bit of Mormon tea. I call the Mormon Church, where I spent 44 years of my life, the friendliest cult in America, and I talk about it as the cult of the family. Mormonism has done a really good job of kind of mitigating our most primal human fear of death, of ourselves and those around us. From the very beginning of religion in the human timeline, we see a lot of rituals and a lot of beliefs around death and burial, and it makes sense. I woke up this morning, snuggled up to Kevin, after spending the evening with a woman who has just tragically lost her husband here in Tucson, Arizona. And I didn't want to get out of bed. I wanted to lay there with my toes pressed up against Kevin's ankles forever, because life is scary. And at some point, we're going to leave behind the people that we love, or the people that we love are going to leave us behind. And neither of those situations feels very good. So we kind of see in this human timeline that as soon as we are smart enough and have the brain capacity to fear death, we begin to do something to mitigate that fear. The very earliest religious relics that we have are found in burial sites. People being buried with a comb made out of a seashell that a deceased person doesn't need. For those of us who have lost people in our lives and know that pain of seeing grandma pass away, or our husband, or a child, or a best friend, you know how painful that grief can be. And I'm sure that a lot of you would say that you did lean into your faith and your beliefs in the afterlife far more during that time than maybe you had in your ordinary day-to-day life up to that point. When I look back myself on losing my grandparents and my best friend, all separately but in very tragic, very heartbreaking circumstances, I can tell you this: my faith in my Mormon religion is what kept me getting out of bed every day. I would have completely unraveled in those circumstances if I hadn't known that they were all going to be in heaven, waiting to live their eternal lives with me. Mormonism has some really unique beliefs, and I think that these beliefs are actually why the Mormon Church does continue to attract new converts. They've really done a great job of answering the problem of the afterlife. If you haven't found Jesus in this life, no problem. They're going to baptize your spirit in the temple vicariously, do all of your ordinances for you. So one day, while you're up there in spirit prison on the other side of the veil, I guess someone's just going to show up at your door one day and be like, hey, your Mormon temple work is done. You're a Mormon now. You can go to the celestial kingdom. It doesn't matter if you've heard the gospel in this life, you still have the opportunity in the next life. And of course, one of the foundational Mormon doctrines is that husband and wife are sealed together for time and all of eternity, and not just till death do us part. As a Mormon girly, that was like my biggest point of pride and snootiness, was like, well, all of my friends, their marriages are just for time and till death do they part. But me and Jake, we're forever. It's such a comforting doctrine, just knowing that like, I still get to be married to my husband in the next life. And in fact, when I left Mormonism and converted to Christianity, and then I almost died of COVID, and they didn't think that I was going to live, and I asked Kev, my Lutheran/Christian partner, what he thought about heaven and if we were going to be together forever. And he was like, well, I mean, I'll probably see you in heaven, but you're just going to be like my friend or something. And no, there's no marriage in heaven. The Bible says so. I had a mental meltdown for about 2 weeks, just grappling with the concept of families not being forever. That was the hardest faith transition of all, leaving Mormonism and coming out into the real world. And now, of course, I'm atheist, and I'll talk about how I grapple with death in another video. Anyway, the Mormon Church is all family. And that's one of the biggest draws to Mormonism, is that they give you this sense of confidence that my relationships can continue beyond the grave. And that's exactly the way that the Mormon Church phrases it. However, for an organization that puts so much emphasis on eternal families and relationships being forever, I would argue that the Mormon Church is the most destructive church for actual family relationships of any organization that I'm personally aware of. And today I'd like to share with you the biggest ways in which my personal family was destroyed by Mormon doctrines. Number one, non-members, unbelievers, Gentiles, the people outside of the fold. My dad was a convert, and he had a single mom that had been a badass single mom and done an amazing job of raising my dad. And she was a Lutheran, as was my dad's sister. And he joined the Mormon Church when he was in his late 20s, early 30s, and went off to BYU, where he met my mom. And becoming a Mormon would eventually completely triangulate him against his whole family and really destroy his life. But I just want to focus on the non-member aspect. My grandma was a Lutheran, and my dad was now a Mormon. And throughout my whole entire childhood, we were always trying to convert my grandma. And we were always seeing my grandma as a sinner. Whether she was drinking coffee and wearing a blouse that just had cap sleeves that we didn't consider modest enough. She lived with a boyfriend for a while, which was really badass because she was like in her 70s and he was hot and had Harley. My grandma would often take our whole family to North's Chuck Wagon, this big buffet that was like really cool in the 70s and 80s, after church on Sunday, which would make my Mormon mom cry. I heard many a fight in the station wagon on the way home from North's Chuck Wagon about how the Grandma Fisher was making us all break the Sabbath and causing so much conflict between my mom and my dad because this non-member was influencing our life. One of the saddest things about this triangulation between non-members within the church is my grandma was not able to be at her only son's wedding because it was inside the Mormon temple. And not being a member, not being worthy to go inside, she just kind of waited in the car so that she could just be there outside the temple to see her new daughter-in-law and her son walking down the steps after the ceremony. I was never bothered by the way that we treated my non-member grandma and other members of our family that were not part of the fold until I left the church in 2018 and was shunned by all of my family. I actually went through like my family pedigree chart one day and added up that I have 625 family members who have ghosted me, and I have not talked to my family, have not heard from my mom, have not seen my parents since I was a Mormon married to Jake, and that has been a very long time. Number two, the senior labor force of the Mormon Church. Now, whether you are serving in family history centers or working as temple workers or actually going out on missions for the church, as soon as somebody's retired, the Mormon Church is really excited to tap into using their labor to build the kingdom. When I was maybe in middle school, my granddad, who I'm always sharing quotes from because he had so many quotable quotes. Hold on, I'm gonna go get a picture. This is my granddad with my kiddos. Now, my grandparents had already been serving in the temple. My grandma was the head matron in the temple for like years and years and years. But as soon as they were fully retired, the church called them on a mission. My grandparents had 5 kids, 29 grandkids, all very young, all very active, and we all very much needed our grandparents. Like my mom literally needed help while she was having surgery from like her parents. We had a great need for the elders in our tribe. And instead, my grandparents were missing in action for years. My grandparents' mission was specifically to the Family History Center in Mesa, Arizona. And even though they were living in their home while serving, it was still treated like a full-time mission. And they couldn't call us on the phone except one day a week. And they couldn't just leave and come visit us or do any of the normal things that they did prior to their mission. And I know that seniors need things that they're involved in. So I'm really glad that my granddad was so involved in family history. I'm glad that they had this opportunity, but the way that the Mormon Church does missions is very weird. You are basically a prisoner of the Mormon Church, and you have to follow their routine and you have to follow their rules. You can't just like say, hey, I'm going to go to my grandkid's birthday party. I have friends whose parents have missed the births of most of their children, who haven't been there for funerals, who missed everything in their families' lives because they were out on multiple mission after mission after mission. I feel deeply that my grandparents were taken from our family, and I will never forgive the Mormon Church for my grandparents not being there for us. Number 3 was my wedding to Jake. You'd think that a church that has the logo of families are forever as part of their marketing would really want weddings to draw people together. But that is absolutely not the case in the Mormon Church. Your Mormon wedding is supposed to be inside the temple if you want to become a god or a goddess someday, and that's the ideal. That's where everybody's supposed to get married. And the unfortunate part of that is that only other members of the church who are temple worthy, temple endowed, have a current temple recommend, are able to be inside that temple for you. So I was the oldest of 5 kids. None of my brothers and sisters were old enough, had their temple recommends, had been endowed. You usually get that before you go on a mission or as a female if you're getting married. So none of my siblings could be at my wedding. My mom and dad found out just a couple days before my wedding that because my dad hadn't paid tithing for a couple of years, the bishop wasn't going to renew their recommend. He wanted to make an example of them. So my parents were not at my wedding. I had friends and family that just simply weren't members of the church. Some of my friends, again, who were younger and didn't have their endowments yet. So inside my temple wedding, besides Jake, who I had just met, and his mom and his sister, were my grandparents, my seminary teacher, my young women's president from like 6 years before, the temple sailor, and just some random people that Jake. It didn't bother me at the time because honestly, I was judging on everybody who wasn't there, like my friends. Well, that's their fault that they're non-members. And my mom and dad, they didn't pay their tithing. That's on them. At the time of my wedding, I was extremely hateful towards everybody who hadn't been there. And it gave me a real superiority complex. Look at me, I'm temple worthy. I'm inside the temple, getting married in the temple. And it wasn't until I left my faith and kind of deconstructed that the full weight of how sad that day was became really apparent. And it gets worse than that. One day I sat down and I thought about all of the weddings in my family that had disrupted those family relationships. You guys, these are people's weddings. This is one of the most important days of your life. You should have your family there. But inside the Mormon temple, that is not a possibility. So I left the Mormon Church just before my oldest son, my baby, got married. And because of that, I was not able to be inside of his wedding. So we went all the way up to Utah during the pandemic for my son's wedding. And we just kind of hung out outside the temple, waiting for them to get married. They came out. We were like, well, how was it? It was absolutely heartbreaking. So then going back a generation, my dad hadn't had his mom at the wedding. My mom hadn't had some of her brothers and some of her family at the wedding and her granddad because they weren't temple worthy. And then going back another generation, my grandparents were both first generation converts. So neither of them had any of their family at their weddings. Just in case any of the prophets or anybody from the Mormon Church ever watch my videos, in my opinion, your wedding should be its own thing and the sealing should be done afterwards in the temple. Those should be separate because it is absolutely heartbreaking that families can't be together for this huge event. Number 4, church callings. The Mormon Church doesn't have like a volunteer program. You don't have a conviction that like you're supposed to be the nursery leader or you're supposed to work with the youth. Your bishop through revelation gets warm, fuzzy feelings and decides to force you to do something that you never once considered doing ever in your life for free without any type of pay. Looking back on my 24-year marriage, I would say that callings were the most divisive tool of Mormonism in our relationship, and in some ways may have led to the complete disintegration of any chance that Jake and I ever had of having a decent chance at a good relationship. And they also robbed me and Jake of a lot of time with our kids and the rest of our family. Let me give you just one example of that. I had my first baby, Mace, when I was 23 years old, and I knew that I was going to be induced because I was 10 days overdue. So I went to church that Sunday and I was like, hey, yeah, tomorrow I'm having the baby. I'm going to the hospital. They're going to induce me. And it was really cool to tell everyone that, like, I'm having a baby. So we get home from church. I'm packing my little suitcase for the hospital. My mom's in town. My mother-in-law's in town. And our phone rings. And it's our bishopric, and they ask if they can come see us. And what I kind of thought in my head was that maybe they were going to come see us to, like, bring us a treat or like a little gift basket for the hospital, something. Like, I thought that they were there to help us, to love and to serve us. But no, they asked if they could sit down with just me and Jake alone. We went to our upstairs office in our home. Three of them, the bishop, first counselor, second counselor. And they were there to give me a calling in a huge young women's presidency as the first counselor. Now, I immediately said, I'm having a baby tomorrow, and I'm going to have probably some physical wounds that I need to heal from. And plus, I'm a first-time mom. I'm super stressed out. And I think that I might die in childbirth because it was my first. So I was really afraid that I wasn't going to make it. And I plan on not coming to church for the first time in my life for the next 2 months so that I can just get a rhythm with my baby and the nursing and spend time with him and all this stuff. So I said no. And the bishopric guilt-tripped me into taking this calling, specifically by saying, Heavenly Father told us that you're supposed to be the first counselor in the Young Women's Presidency. And the next Sunday after having my baby, I was in church with that baby. I would teach young women's lessons with him under the little hooter hider. I was to Wednesday night activities every week. I completely missed out on those first couple months with my first baby. And then I went to girls' camp. I weaned him so that I could go to girls' camp because of Mormon calling. Beyond that, all of the activity that Jake and I were involved in at church kept us going in opposite directions at all times. There were Sundays when he would have meetings at 6 o'clock in the morning, or when he was in stake callings where he had to go to other congregations for like 12 Sundays out of the year. For much of the time that our 5 kids were really young, Jake was obviously in scouts, and that meant that he would be away for the weekends and he would be away at scout camp. And there were just so many times that I just didn't have a husband, or that I was like sitting in a pew with 5 children, 2 babies under the age of 2, all by myself with my husband off at another ward. Number 5, missions. Missions are the single most divisive thing that the Mormon Church does, hands down. When my son went out on his Mormon mission, he stopped being our son. We actually got an email when he got to his mission after the MTC from his mission president that said, we consider ourselves Mason's mom and dad now. We only got 1 email from him a week. We had no phone access to him whatsoever. When Hurricane Harvey hit in Houston and my son was trapped in an apartment, I was not allowed to talk to him. When he came back to our family, the bonds that had connected us to one another and connected him to his siblings had virtually disintegrated, and we had to start over as though he was an absolute stranger. It's not like going to college where you get to come home on the weekend. The Mormon Church very carefully controls everything about that mission. And for all of you Mormons out there that are going to say, but now they can call their parents and they get cell phones, that is brand new. And it's because ex-Mormons like myself, with reaches of millions of people, have verbally shone a light on this for so long that the church has to change. Okay, then I have just a couple of honorable mentions that don't make my dirty top 5 list. Mormon wards, you are geographically assigned to the boundary that your address is in. So there have been times when, like, my mom lived 5 minutes away and I wasn't allowed to attend the same congregation as her on Sundays because the church wants to break down those family ties and make sure that you're more connected to the people that you're assigned to than your actual birth family, kind of like Chairman Mao did in China. It's completely psychopathic. I've had friends who, like, their whole family bought houses in this community, and then, like, the country club was all divided into like 2 or 3 wards, and now their sisters and everybody all goes to different wards, and it's so heartbreaking. Mormons don't just get to go to, like, the congregation of choice. They're assigned. I feel like Mormon garments deserve a little shout out on this list of things that alienate families, because it's a real hardship for couples to always have to be in these garments. I took them literally that I had to wear them day and night, and we had the old-fashioned ones that looked like this, like they were utterly ridiculous. And in 24 years of being married, I do not think that me and Jake ever slept without our clothes on together, ever. Because after we got done doing the deed, we put our jeans back on so that we could be protected by the Holy Spirit. And like, they're just so unattractive. Like now when I get to stand in the bathroom and like my little organic panties and a little bra or no bra, depending on the day, and Kevin's like brushing his teeth, like it's such a different vibe than the 24 years that poor Jake got this. Like, we really didn't have a chance because of the garments. Lastly, I just think that this is so creepy now, but we were taught that a marriage is made up of 3 people, husband, wife, Lord. And I felt that all the time. Like, I felt like Jesus was like personally watching us conceive our children. I felt like there were times that I would take stuff to the Lord instead of just like talking directly to my husband. And there were times that we dealt with things by like going to church instead of like actually like therapy. You guys, it's triangulation. There's a triangle right there. Like, you can't argue that. All right, that's it. That's all I got for you. Now, if you are or have ever been Mormon, I would love to hear from you, what you would put on this list. And if you're not Mormon, was there something on this list that jumped out to you that you didn't know before? Thanks for spending time with me. Love you guys. Have a great day. Mwah.